What's up, everyone? Welcome back to ForexMpesa Q&A. I'm Ben. If you listened to episode 1, you already know how this works. I take real questions from real traders, and I give real answers. No fluff, no sugarcoating, no fake promises, and definitely no secret strategy that's supposedly making somebody a millionaire while they're spending all day trying to sell it to you. Just honest conversations about trading. Now, before we get started, if you've got a question you'd like answered on a future episode, send it through the link in the description box below. I read every question that comes in. And who knows, your question might become a future episode of the show. You'll also find links in the description to the brokers and resources I personally recommend for traders. If you're looking for a place to start, check those out after the episode. Now, today's question is one that almost every trader asks when they're getting started. And honestly, it's one of the most important questions you can ask. Because before you start looking for strategies, before you start worrying about indicators, before you start thinking about making money, you need to know where you're going to learn. And that's becoming harder every year. Because the internet is absolutely flooded with Forex education. You've got YouTube, you've got TikTok, you've got Instagram, you've got Telegram groups, Discord communities, online courses, mentorship programs, signal providers, trading influencers. Everybody claims they know the answer. Everybody claims they're profitable. Everybody claims they have the system. Everybody claims they have the secret. And if you're brand new, it's incredibly difficult to know who's worth listening to. So let's get into today's question. This week's question comes from Marcus in Ohio. Marcus asks, Ben, I want to learn Forex properly, but there are so many courses, channels, and gurus online. How do I know where to start? And is it worth paying for a course? Marcus, fantastic question. Because the answer to this question shapes everything else. The way you learn trading often determines how successful you're going to become. And unfortunately, most traders start in exactly the wrong place. Not because they're lazy, not because they're stupid, not because they don't work hard, but because they're looking for a shortcut. Now let's be honest. When most people first discover Forex, they don't fall in love with candlestick patterns. They don't fall in love with economic data. They don't fall in love with risk management. They fall in love with the possibility of freedom, the possibility of extra income, the possibility of building something for themselves. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's exactly what attracted me to trading in the first place. But that excitement can also become dangerous. Because when you're excited, you're vulnerable. You want results quickly. You want progress quickly. You want success quickly. And that's when the marketing starts working. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The trader standing next to a Lamborghini. The trader showing screenshots of huge profits. The trader posting videos from a luxury hotel in Dubai. The trader telling you that all you need is their mentorship, their course, their signals, their VIP group, their private community. And suddenly, trading starts looking less like a skill and more like a shortcut. That's the first trap. And it's a big one, because trading is not a shortcut. It's a profession, and professions require education. Imagine somebody saying they want to become a doctor. Would you tell them to watch random videos on social media? Of course not. Would you tell them to follow 10 different doctors who all disagree with each other? Of course not. You'd tell them to get a proper education, a structured education, a foundation. And that's exactly what traders need. The problem is that most traders never build one. Instead, they jump from one piece of information to another. One day, they're learning support and resistance. The next day, they're learning smart money concepts. The next day, they're learning Elliott wave. The next day, they're learning ICT. The next day, they're learning order blocks. The next day, they're downloading a robot. The next day, they're joining a signal group. And 6 months later, they're completely confused. Not because they haven't worked hard, but because they never followed a structure. Think about building a house. You don't start with the roof. You don't start with the windows. You don't start painting the walls. You start with the foundation. Everything else sits on top of that. Trading is exactly the same. And that's why my first piece of advice is simple. Do not pay for the basics. I'm going to say that again. Do not pay for the basics. There are people charging hundreds of dollars to explain what a pip is. There are people charging thousands of dollars to explain leverage. There are people selling courses that teach information you can find for free in a single afternoon. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying every paid course is a scam. There are good educators out there. There are people providing real value. There are courses that genuinely help people. But here's what I am saying. You don't need to spend money to learn the fundamentals. You don't. The information already exists for free. And that's actually great news, because trading is already difficult enough. Why spend hundreds or thousands of dollars before you've even decided whether you enjoy it? Why invest heavily into education before you've built the foundation? Instead, start simple. Learn how the Forex market works. Learn what currency pairs are. Learn how leverage works. Learn how margin works. Learn position sizing. Learn risk management. Learn how orders are executed. Learn market sessions. Learn the fundamentals first, because here's the truth. Most traders fail long before they ever reach advanced concepts. They fail because they never master the basics. And that's something you don't hear enough people talk about. Everybody wants the advanced stuff. Everybody wants the institutional secrets. Everybody wants the hidden strategy. Nobody wants to talk about risk management. Nobody wants to talk about position sizing. Nobody wants to talk about discipline. Yet those are the things that determine whether a trader survives. Not the fancy stuff, the boring stuff. And that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned over the years. The boring things matter. The exciting things get clicks. The boring things make money. Think about that. The exciting things get views. The boring things keep traders alive. And that's why your learning process matters so much. Because if you build the wrong foundation, everything else becomes unstable. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happens to many traders. They spend years trying to fix problems that were created during the learning process itself. They're constantly searching for better strategies, better indicators, better mentors, better courses, when the real problem is that their foundation was never strong to begin with. And that's what we're going to talk about in part 2. Because once you've decided where to learn, the next question becomes, how should you learn? How do you actually study trading effectively? How do you avoid information overload? How do you build knowledge instead of just consuming content? That's where we'll pick things up next. I'll see you in part 2. Welcome back. Before the break, we talked about where you should learn Forex. We talked about building a foundation. We talked about why most beginners get overwhelmed. And we talked about why you don't need to spend a fortune learning the basics. Now I want to answer what I think is the more important question. Not where should you learn, but how should you learn? Because honestly, two traders can study the exact same material and get completely different results. One trader becomes consistently profitable. The other trader stays stuck for years. Same information, different outcome. Why? Because learning isn't just about information. It's about how you process that information. And that's where a lot of traders make mistakes. One of the biggest mistakes I see is what I call content addiction. You know exactly what I'm talking about. A trader watches a YouTube video, then another, then another, then another. Before they know it, they've spent 6 hours consuming trading content. At the end of the day, they feel productive. They feel like they've learned something. But when you ask them what they actually learned, they can't tell you. Because they weren't learning. They were consuming. There's a difference. Think about it. You can watch fitness videos all day long. You can watch cooking videos all day long. You can watch basketball highlights all day long. That doesn't mean you've become fitter. That doesn't mean you've become a chef. That doesn't mean you've become a basketball player. Watching isn't doing. And that's one of the hardest lessons traders have to learn. At some point, education needs to become action. Otherwise, you're just entertaining yourself. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying educational content is bad. You're literally listening to a podcast right now. Educational content is incredibly valuable, but only when it's being applied. Only when you're actually doing something with it. That's why I always tell traders, take notes. Real notes, not screenshots, not bookmarks, not 50 tabs open in your browser. Actual notes. Write things down. Because when you write something down, something interesting happens. Your brain slows down. Instead of consuming information, you start processing it. You start organizing it. You start questioning it. You start understanding it. And that's where learning begins. When I was learning Forex, I had notebooks filled with notes, pages and pages, definitions, concepts, observations, questions, ideas, mistakes, lessons, everything. And looking back, those notebooks became more valuable than almost any piece of educational content I consumed, because they weren't somebody else's thoughts. They were mine. And that's what I want for you. I don't want you becoming a copy of another trader. I want you developing your own understanding. Because eventually, that's what separates successful traders from everybody else. Successful traders think independently. Now here's another mistake beginners make. They want advanced information immediately. They want the secret stuff, the institutional stuff, the hidden strategy, the thing nobody else knows, the thing that's supposedly going to change everything. And honestly, I understand it. It's exciting. It sounds sophisticated. It feels like progress. But here's the problem. Advanced information on top of a weak foundation is useless. Actually, it's worse than useless. It's confusing. Imagine trying to learn advanced calculus before you've mastered basic arithmetic. Imagine trying to fly an airplane before learning how the controls work. Imagine trying to perform surgery before understanding anatomy. It doesn't make sense. Yet traders do this every day. They skip the fundamentals because the fundamentals feel boring. Then they wonder why everything feels complicated. The truth is, most trading problems aren't advanced problems. Most trading problems are basic problems. Poor risk management, poor discipline, poor patience, poor expectations, overtrading, revenge trading, position sizes that are too large. These are beginner mistakes, and they're responsible for destroying more accounts than any market condition ever could. Let's talk about expectations for a minute, because this is another area where traders get into trouble. Most people come into trading expecting results too quickly. They think they'll study for a few weeks, maybe a few months. Then suddenly everything will click. They'll become profitable, and they'll start making consistent income. That's not how it works. Trading is a skill, and skills take time. Nobody expects to become a professional musician in 3 months. Nobody expects to become a professional athlete in 6 months. Nobody expects to become a surgeon after watching a handful of videos. Yet people expect trading to be different. Why? Because the internet sells the illusion that it's different. The internet makes trading look easy. The internet makes success look immediate. The internet makes it seem like everybody is winning. And that creates unrealistic expectations. Now here's the reality. The first goal of a new trader should not be making money. I know that's not what people want to hear, but it's true. Your first goal should be understanding the market. Your second goal should be protecting your capital. Your third goal should be consistency. And only then should you start worrying about scaling profits. Because if you skip those steps, the market will force you back anyway, usually through losses. And losses are expensive teachers. Trust me, I've been there. Most experienced traders have been there. We've all paid tuition to the market at some point. The difference is whether you learn from it. Now here's something I wish somebody had told me years ago. Learning Forex is not a race. Read that again mentally. Learning Forex is not a race. Nobody gets extra profits for learning faster. Nobody gets a trophy for rushing. In fact, the traders who rush are often the ones who struggle the most, because they spend so much time chasing shortcuts that they never build real skills. And here's the irony. The shortcut usually ends up taking longer. Think about that. The trader chasing shortcuts spends years jumping from strategy to strategy, course to course, mentor to mentor, signal group to signal group, always searching, always looking, always believing the next thing will finally be the answer. Meanwhile, another trader quietly studies the fundamentals, builds a process, keeps notes, practices patiently, improves gradually. And 5 years later, guess who's usually in a better position? The trader who focused on fundamentals, every single time, because fundamentals scale, tricks don't. That's one of the biggest lessons I've learned. The traders who survive are usually not the smartest. They're not the luckiest. They're not necessarily the most talented. They're the most consistent. They keep showing up. They keep learning. They keep improving, one step at a time. And that's exactly how I want you to approach your education. Build slowly, build correctly, build deliberately. Because the foundation you're building today is going to support everything you do tomorrow. And in part 3, we're going to talk about something that might surprise some people. We're going to talk about why much of what traders learn doesn't actually help them make money, why you still need to learn it anyway, and why most traders stay trapped in the exact same cycle year after year. I'll see you in part 3. Welcome back. So far, we've talked about where to learn Forex. We've talked about how to learn Forex. Now I want to talk about something that might sound a little controversial, but I think it's one of the most important things you'll hear as a trader. A large portion of what you're going to learn about trading is probably not going to make you money. Let that sink in for a moment. Because most people assume that if something is taught everywhere, it must work. If everybody is talking about it, it must be valuable. If millions of traders use it, it must be effective. But that's not always true. And this is where trading becomes very different from many other professions. You see, in most industries, bad information gets filtered out over time. If a bridge design doesn't work, the bridge collapses. If a medical procedure doesn't work, it gets replaced. If an engineering principle doesn't work, it doesn't survive. But trading is different. Bad ideas can survive for decades, sometimes generations. Because when traders fail, they rarely blame the information. They blame themselves. Think about that. A trader learns a strategy. The strategy doesn't produce consistent results. Instead of questioning the strategy, they assume they need more practice, more discipline, more experience, more education. So they go looking for another teacher who teaches essentially the same thing with slightly different packaging. And the cycle continues. Now, before anybody misunderstands me, I'm not saying traditional trading concepts are useless. Far from it. You should absolutely learn them. Learn support and resistance. Learn trend lines. Learn moving averages. Learn chart patterns. Learn indicators. Learn all of it. Study it. Understand it. Become fluent in the language of trading. Because literacy matters. You need to understand what other traders are talking about. You need to understand the concepts being discussed. You need to understand the broader landscape. But learning something doesn't mean you need to build your entire trading approach around it. And that's the distinction many traders miss. Imagine learning history. Just because you study a historical event doesn't mean you have to agree with every decision that was made. You're learning to understand, not necessarily to imitate. Trading should be approached the same way. Understand everything, question everything, test everything, accept nothing blindly. That's a habit I wish more traders developed. Because one of the biggest problems in this industry is blind acceptance. Somebody with a large following says something. Everybody repeats it. Somebody posts a chart. Everybody copies it. Somebody creates a new concept. Everybody starts teaching it. Very few people stop and ask, does this actually work? Not theoretically, not emotionally, not because it sounds smart. Actually work? That's a powerful question. And it's a question that separates serious traders from casual traders. Serious traders test ideas. Casual traders collect ideas. Serious traders seek evidence. Casual traders seek confirmation. Serious traders care about results. Casual traders care about stories. And the longer you're in this business, the more important that distinction becomes. Now let's talk about something that almost nobody wants to hear. Most traders stay stuck because they're trapped in an information cycle. They keep learning, but they never evolve. Every year it's the same pattern. New strategy, new indicator, new course, new mentor, new system, new promise. And 6 months later, they're right back where they started. Not because they didn't work hard, but because they never developed a process for evaluating information. Everything looks equally important. Everything looks equally valuable. And that's dangerous, because not all information deserves your attention. One of the biggest mindset shifts I ever had was realizing that trading success wasn't about learning more and more things. It was about understanding a few important things extremely well. Think about that. Most traders are trying to learn everything. Successful traders often focus on mastering the essentials: risk management, execution, consistency, patience, discipline, process. These topics aren't exciting. Nobody makes viral videos about position sizing. Nobody gets millions of views talking about patience. Nobody becomes famous discussing risk management. But these are the things that keep traders in the game. And staying in the game matters. Because you can't improve if you're constantly blowing up accounts. You can't develop experience if you're always starting over. You can't build confidence if you're never consistent. That's why I believe your first responsibility as a trader is survival. Protect your capital. Protect your confidence. Protect your ability to keep learning. Everything else comes later. Now let me bring this back to Marcus's original question. Where is the best place to learn Forex trading? Here's my answer. Start with a structured educational foundation. Use high-quality free resources before spending money. Learn the fundamentals thoroughly. Take notes. Build your own understanding. Don't rush. Don't chase shortcuts. Don't assume expensive means better. Don't assume popular means effective. And most importantly, don't confuse information with skill, because they're not the same thing. Information tells you what to do. Skill is your ability to execute it, and execution is where results come from. If you've been listening to this episode and you're brand new to trading, here's what I want you to do this week. Pick one educational resource. Just one. Stop jumping around. Stop consuming random content. Choose a structured path. Commit to it. Take notes. Learn the basics properly. Build the foundation. If you've been trading for a while, I want you to ask yourself a different question. Have I been collecting information? Or have I been building skill? Because those are very different activities. And sometimes the biggest breakthroughs happen when we stop searching for more information and start applying what we already know. That's where growth happens. That's where confidence develops. That's where consistency begins. And that's exactly what we're going to continue exploring on this podcast. Because every episode from here builds on the last one. We're going to challenge assumptions. We're going to question conventional wisdom. We're going to talk about the things most traders never hear about. Not because they're secret, but because they're often ignored. And those ignored topics are sometimes the ones that matter most. If you've got a question you'd like answered on a future episode, send it through the link in the description box below. And while you're down there, you'll also find links to the brokers, tools, and trading resources I personally recommend. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We've got some great topics coming up. And trust me, things are only going to get more interesting from here. Thanks for listening. Trade safe. Keep learning. Keep improving. And I'll catch you next time. I'm Ben. See you in episode 3.